Bhikkhuni Day was to be an annual event to honor the essential role played by the Bhikkhuni Sangha in preserving and propagating the Dhamma. A time to remember the great Bhikkhuni teachers of the past, and as well as a time for those who were favorable towards the existence of Bhikkhunis or the ordination of Bhikkhunis to be able to, in a certain way, publicize or show the world about the existence of Bhikkhunis. So in those towns and villages where you don't have any Bhikkhunis, Susan, the first president of the Alliance for Bhikkhunis, had the idea that they could have a special meditation event or a day-long event or a teaching event dedicated to studying and recalling about the Bhikkhuni Sangha, to bring it to the attention of especially new Buddhists who might not be aware of that it was even possible for a woman to go forth in this form. Susan Pembroke and several of the other leaders in those days had the opportunity to take meditation retreats, receive the teaching, and become disciples of Ayakema. Ayakema being a very powerful and effective Dhamma teacher who, in a way that was quite unique, obtained the Bhikkhuni form of ordination, took on the brown robes of the Theravada form in the faith with the meditation teachers with whom she had trained and gotten the greatest benefit. And then for quite a few years, there wasn't any Bhikkhuni Sangha in the West. So Ayakema was sort of out there by herself as this powerful force, this powerful meditation teacher. And so then the presence of such an effective and accomplished teacher as Ayakema in these modern times meant that then later on, when the first larger ordinations were happening in 1996 and even more so in 1998, there were many, I'm not sure how many in all over the whole world, but there was approximately 50 Sri Lankan women who were ordained as Bhikkhunis in 1998. And they quickly went on to do additional ordinations in the following years, so that now there's many thousands of Bhikkhunis practicing there in Sri Lanka. Ayakema had a presence in Sri Lanka. She was practicing in a place called the Nuns Island. And so she had her impact there. And then as well, here in California, you might not realize this, but in North America, California is sort of like, I don't know if it's, I'm not sure what metaphor to use, but of all the Bhikkhunis in North America, there's an extremely high concentration of them in California, or there was, with those, with our Sangha here, the Dhammadharini Sangha, the Alokavihara Sangha, the Mahapajapati Sangha, the Karuna Vihara in the Bay Area, and many others. So that and then all that while until very recently, in the entirety of New England and the Northeast, I think we had one Bhikkhuni, and in the southern states we had two Bhikkhunis for the longest time. In the Midwest, maybe we had one or two. And the acceptance of Bhikkhunis in California could have been in part because California is on the Pacific Ocean, and there's quite a lot of persons from the whole Asian diaspora. California is a very multicultural kind of a place. But then it's also true because of Ayakema and the impact that she had back in the 60s when she was actually teaching and giving retreats here. I'm going to type that in the chat. They are a grant-making organization. They accept donations, and without having any money at all spent on overhead, the volunteers there use the entire amount to support Bhikkhunis all over the world. They've given grants to Bhikkhunis here in USA, including Dhammadharini, to help with various urgent and timely things that came along. And they also have supported the Bhikkhunis in Sri Lanka, India, Thailand, Vietnam, New Zealand, Australia, the Czech Republic, Belgium, Italy, England, Canada, and as just already said, the United States. And through their support, the financial help from the Alliance for Bhikkhunis, as well as the kind of leadership and moral support, sisterly support and advice, and help with organizing ordinations that have been given by the Bhikkhuni leaders, such as Ayatollah and several other of the first generation of the Bhikkhuni leaders, then it has become possible for the Bhikkhuni Sangha to be established in the various countries, first in Australia, then New Zealand, Thailand, and then in Vietnam. In all of these places, we have healthy, thriving Sanghas of Theravada Bhikkhunis. And then in Europe, over the past few years, Dhammadharini had that great good fortune to have a chance to assist some of the European women who were preparing for their ordination. We had some part in assisting with those ordinations. And now there is a well-established, complete Bhikkhuni Sangha in Germany, which is capable of doing their own ordinations. They don't have to send away to North America or to any place else to get Bhikkhunis to help out with their ordinations. They're able to do it themselves. They have their own daughters of that land who are in the Sangha, competent and capable to do ordinations. And then the Theravada Bhikkhuni Sangha in England, I think, is going to pop soon. We have a small outpost in England. Then this past 3 or 4 years, Dhammadharini has had the wonderful opportunity to meet some of the Cambodian heritage women who had been seeking the Bhikkhuni ordination without having the opportunity at all in their homeland or in Cambodia. You might know that because of Cambodia's history, there's quite a big diaspora of people who had to leave Cambodia during the previous wartime and went all over the world. And so now, this year at Dhammadharini, we have American Cambodian Bhikkhuni from Boston, another American Cambodian Bhikkhuni who was living most recently in North Carolina, a Canadian Cambodian Bhikkhuni who I think was born in Cambodia but has lived for many years in Canada as a Canadian citizen, and a German Cambodian Bhikkhuni. We've had them visiting us for the past few years in different combinations, and this year during this Vasa, we have a complete Sangha of 4 Cambodian heritage Bhikkhunis within the complete Sangha of 8 Bhikkhunis who are staying with Dhammadharini during this Vasa. So during this 3 months of this Vasa, the 8 of us are able to meet together to do our monastic things in terms of studying the Dhamma and having our Patimokkha recitation. That's the recitation of the monastic rules that happens at the on the lunar days, and then as well, the subgroup of the Cambodian heritage Bhikkhunis are able to study and translate their Vinaya studies in the Khmer language and practice being able to teach the Dhamma in the Khmer language so that then subsequently it may be possible then to have a proper, well-trained and good Bhikkhuni Sangha to come to be planted and established and to thrive in that country. The Bhikkhuni Sangha had died out completely during the preceding 900 years before it was revived. And why did the Bhikkhuni Sangha die out? Well, we'll have to say because of accidents of history, or we could say because of a certain trend of patriarchy, which was not supportive of the women having that status, not supporting their training, not supporting their welfare, not supporting their survival. And so then it came to be that even at the same time that in the Mahayana in China, especially in and then from China in Korea, the Bhikkhuni Sangha survived with the Fourfold Sangha. And so you had in the Mahayana a really strong, powerful tradition of these Bhikkhuni teachers. There was some reason in Chinese culture and in the cultures that were sort of under the influence of Chinese culture that it seemed that if a family had daughters, that it would be a good thing to put at least one of them into the Bhikkhuni form. And so because for some reason, this is an accident of culture, there was some kind of support, and so there was that stability. I have encountered so many Bhikkhunis who are trained in the Mahayana who are superb in their strength of their discipline, in the power of their meditation practice, and in the good works in some countries that they have done in terms of being leaders with hospitals and colleges and education and other kinds of social functions, and especially I think of this in terms of Taiwan, of Mahayana Bhikkhunis who are fully enlightened, of in Korea we hear the story of the Mahayana Bhikkhunis who were suppressed during the period of World War II, where Korea became a colony of Japan, and Japanese Buddhism had centuries earlier not wanted the monks to be the independent celibate order, as has been laid down by the Buddha, but instead, as a result of the royal intervention, the monks were required to be married, and they were given temples as a license from the government. They would come to be licensed leaders of a particular temple, and then that temple would be inherited by their children. So you had a married monkhood that was inherited through the family line, and which was licensed by the government and under the control of the government. So then during World War II, they tried to force the monks and nuns to marry and to give up their celibacy, to give up their Vinaya. But a certain number of, some of the monks and nuns did this, and they converted to that style of monastic life. Others of them held onto their Vinaya and fled to remote places in the high mountains and hid out from the Japanese for the entire duration of the war, until the war was over. And then after the war was over, then they emerged from their seclusion. I met one group of these Korean nuns some years ago. I think it was 2007. I had a chance to go with Ayatollah Loka to an international gathering on the role of women in Buddhism that was held in Germany. And there was one of the leaders of the Korean Sangha there with this wonderful large group of followers, and they had such fantastic deportment. Seeing the chief nun in this group with her disciples following behind her was tremendously impressive. And then that nun gave a presentation at this conference showing photographs of the preceding generations of the Bhikkhunis, the ones who had survived the war and come out of that war. And you could just feel that they were like women of steel. They had so much strength to have been able to survive the war without giving up their Vinaya. In the world today, I would have to say that in the Theravada side, the revived Bhikkhuni Sangha is numerous, but still not free from prejudice, not properly integrated into the formal leadership of the Buddhist Bhikkhu Sangha in the home countries of Buddhism. So the Bhikkhunis are there. They have a valid ordination. You could attend a whole seminar and take a whole day or a week learning about the validity of the Bhikkhuni ordination in the revived Theravada form. And yet the formal structures of the leadership of the Bhikkhu Sangha is not formally including the Bhikkhunis. What I have encountered in when I was in Thailand and also in Sri Lanka, that so many bhikkhus who were well-educated bhikkhus who had a goodwill and a powerful faith in the Dhamma Dana that's been passed down to us would be so supportive, friendly, and generous towards the bhikkhunis at the personal level, and yet still not able to implement that friendship, I'll say, at the level of Bhikkhu Sangha politics. So that's where we are. Here in USA, the bhikkhus are in some cases not as much under the control of Sangha politics of the home countries. And so we see that the support, friendship, and really just enthusiasm that the Bhikkhunis have shown towards that the Bhikkhus show towards the Bhikkhunis is truly lovely. It's wonderful. It's inspiring. Here this year, when we have our guest, this group of the visiting Bhikkhunis with us this year, the 4 Cambodians, almost several times a month, they are invited to go as a group to the nearby Cambodian temples, because the bhikkhus there feel so inspired, and all of the Cambodian people in Sonoma County or in Northern California feel so delighted and happy and pleased and say, wow, 4 bhikkhunis, so it's a Bhikkhuni Sangha. It's amazing. They're just, kind of like the hearts leap up with joy about the possibility for the Bhikkhuni Sangha to be there within their own cultural setting. I'm going to quote you a couple of lines from the suttas. Shortly after the Buddha obtained his enlightenment, shortly after the Bodhisattva obtained his enlightenment and became the Buddha, he was visited by Mara, the evil one, one of the manifestations of death, the god of death. And Mara said, well, oh, Venerable Sir, now you've obtained your full enlightenment and become a Buddha. Your work is finished. Why don't you just disappear right now and leave this human form now that you've completed your goal? And the Buddha said, wicked one, I will not become fully extinguished until I have bhikkhu disciples who are competent, educated, assured, learned, have memorized the teachings, practiced in line with the teachings. Not until they practice properly, living in line with the teaching. Not until they've learned their tradition and explain, teach, assert, establish, disclose, analyze, and make it clear. Not until they can legitimately and completely refute the doctrines of others that come up and teach with a demonstrable basis. Only then will I depart from this human form. And then he said, wicked one, I will not become fully extinguished until I have Bhikkhuni disciples who are competent, educated, assured, learned, have memorized the teachings, and practice in line with the teachings. Not until they practice properly, living in line with the teaching. Not until they've learned their tradition and explain, teach, assert, establish, disclose, analyze, and make it clear. Not until they can legitimately and completely refute the doctrines of others that come up and teach with a demonstrable basis. Not until then will I give up this human form. And he made the same statement regarding the upasaka, upasika, his male and female disciples. So, right from the very beginning, the Buddha had it in mind that there would be bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, and that the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis don't have a monopoly on the Dhamma, but instead the Dhamma is available for all, and that there will be lay people also who are learned in this way. Then another quote that I want to make is, this is part of the Gautami Sutta, which is in the Anguttara Nikaya. This is the story about how Gautami, the Bhikkhuni Mahapajapati Gautami, approached the Buddha and requested the full ordination. I think this was 5 years after the establishment of the Bhikkhu Sangha, and numerous men, thousands of men, had left home, left their families behind, and gone and ordained under the Buddha. So in the royal household especially, this was from the Buddha's home city where he had been raised. So many of the Buddha's relatives and cousins had left that there were quite a lot of women who had been left behind. And they also had heard the teachings of the Buddha, and they had been practicing. And they also wanted to go forth. So she went and asked, and now the statement I want to quote is, the Buddha said, a female is able to realize the fruits of stream entry, once return, non-return, and perfection, once she has gone forth in the holy life. There are other things in this sutta that are not so pleasant for us to hear. It's thought that perhaps the sutta may have evolved a bit over the centuries after the Buddha's parinibbana, and there was some kind of a cultural shift that happened after the reign of King Asoka, like around the actually around the beginning of the Christian era, or in the first couple of centuries after the beginning of the Christian era. Then the whole world, not only in Buddhism, but all India and even in Europe, the world became, the status of women became less. She became more oppressed, less free, more strictly held under the domination of the men. So what we've had is in connection with this this particular sutta and a few others. There, it's Anguttara 851, the Gautami Sutta. I'm going to give you a version of it that was summarized by Bhikkhu Analayo, who's a great friend of the Bhikkhuni ordination, who's also helpfully studied all of the different text traditions of Buddhism, say the early Buddhist texts as they were translated in the agamas of the Chinese and as they were translated in the other text traditions of Buddhism that eventually became the Mahayana and the Tibetan traditions. So in his summary, the Madhyama Agama, when Gautami comes, the Buddha directs Gautami, shave off your hair like this, put on the ochre robes, and for your whole life practice the pure holy life. But he didn't give them permission to wander. The monks would have been wandering individually. The Buddha said no two monks should go in the same direction. They should go individually and walk across India, sleeping at the foot of trees and teaching people about the Dhamma. But the Buddha expected that the danger of rape, that if the Bhikkhunis were wandering, that they would be subjected to abuse and rape, and it would ruin him. He gives an example of how a house or a farm that has mostly women and very few men would be subjected to being pillaged by robbers. Now this is interpreted in our Pali Theravada tradition, that the Buddha was saying that Buddhism would not last very long if there were both bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. Bhikkhu Analayo interprets the metaphor to mean that if the bhikkhunis are wandering unprotected and subjected to violence, then the Bhikkhuni Sangha will not last very long. And then he gives another metaphor of a rice field that has been subject to the red rust disease and become stunted and ruined. And he said that the Sangha would become like that if the Bhikkhunis were ordained. And Bhante Analio reinterprets that to mean he was saying the Bhikkhuni Sangha would be like that they would be ruined if they had to wander, and if they were subjected to violence and rape, that they would become, like a field where nothing could grow because of disease. So, following that, the Buddha went on. This request was made during the Vasa while the Buddha was staying in one place. Then at the end of the Vasa, the Buddha went with his followers to wander. Now, it was not that uncommon for lay people to follow along when the Buddha was wandering. So there'd be this tremendous mass. There'd be a large group of bhikkhus wandering, and then there'd be a large group of lay students or disciples, followers, also following this group in order to hear the teachings of the Buddha. And then Mahapajapati, having gotten permission to ordain, then wandered behind behind the group of the monks with the nuns with the shaved heads and wearing their robes. These were royal ladies who had been living in the town, having a comfortable, privileged life. And they were not used to walking so much. So doing this long trek was very difficult for them. Then there came a time later that it was said that they were standing outside the wall. Mahapajapati was standing outside the wall weeping, covered with dust, being disheveled and dirty. People who are prejudiced describe this as showing how bad they were, that they put on the robes without having permission, which is that's kind of like impossible. Mahapajapati was a stream enterer. Someone who is a stream enterer in the presence of a Sammasambuddha would not be able to disobey the direct instruction of the Buddha. So then we think this Madhyamaka Agama version in which the Buddha did give that instruction. In the Pali text version, that part has been erased. But then the Buddha, then seeing how keen they were and their ability to face the difficulties of the homeless life, then he saw this and he gave them permission to fully join the order, and gave the instruction for the bhikkhus to join the Sangha. And so that's one part of what I can tell you. This aspect of there's two aspects of oppression. One is being subject to violence, and the other one is being erased or disappeared. And so those who are historians can see how the greatness and the power of the first generation of the Bhikkhunis got very confused and was in part erased or disappeared. One example of this is about Upalavana. Upalavana was extremely beautiful. She was so beautiful that the young men from many different kingdoms were desiring to marry her. And her father came to fear that there would even be a war because the different kings of different kingdoms would be willing to make a war to get Upalavana's hand in marriage. She was that beautiful. And so her father had the inspiration of not letting her marry at all, and instead letting her to become a bhikkhuni, which she very gratefully and joyfully accepted, as it was the inclination of her heart. She became well known for having magical powers. I'm going to open up one verse that was given. This is where the evil one accosts Upalavana. This is one of the places to show how powerful she is. Mara says, "You've gone to the saltry with the flowering top. You stand at its foot all alone, Bhikkhuni. There are none whose beauty rivals yours. Foolish girl, aren't you afraid of rogues?" And Upalavana replies, "Though 100,000 rogues just like you might come here, I stir not a hair. I feel no terror. Even alone, Mara, I don't fear you. I can make myself disappear, or I can enter inside your belly. I can stand between your eyebrows, yet you won't catch a glimpse of me. I am the master of my own mind. The bases of power are well developed. I am freed from all bondage. Therefore, I don't fear you, friend." At the time when the Buddha is said to have gone to the Metteyya heaven to teach the Abhidhamma to his birth mother, it's said that Upalavana wanted to be the first to greet him, and that she was somehow transformed into the figure of a wheel-turning king. So she changed her gender and became a king for the purpose of being the first to greet the Buddha. So she starts out as a simple, powerful forest recluse, seated beneath the tree for her day's abiding, and able to conquer Mara. Her other verse is, "Now I have directly realized the 6 higher knowledges. The divine eye has been purified. My hearing is pure, and I know the minds of others. I have great supernormal powers. I have annihilated all the obsessions of mind. The Buddha's teaching has been done." This is her declaration of her ordination. Then later on, in the later tradition, Ayatollah has written a lovely article about this. It's called the Transformations of Arahant Theri Upalavana. That's my source for these few stories, just a sample of the many stories that evolved around Upalavana that Ayatollah recounted. First, she's made into a male. Then, afterwards, she, in some cases, she's disappears completely from the story. There's another story in which she's sitting in the forest and she's raped by a monk. And because of this story, several rules are laid down to make it the most serious possible kind of an offense that one can do to assault a bhikkhuni. So for a monk or even for a novice, if they assault a bhikkhuni, then they are it's a fault that they cannot redeem themselves from in this lifetime. They would not be able to be a bhikkhu again. And then, but the weird thing about it is, how could it be that Upalavana, that's so powerful that she could defeat Mara and disappear herself and go between his eyebrows and still he can't see her? How is it that then she is able to be raped? And how is it possible that in the Bhikkhunis Vinaya, we have many rules and regulations that are designed to protect Bhikkhunis from being assaulted, but none of the stories and none of the commentary in any of the Bhikkhuni side knows about Upalavana being raped. Only the monks know this, but the Bhikkhunis never heard of it. So that would make us think that maybe that story is sort of like, I don't know, some kind of a projection, or that they just, sometimes for a story they just pick a name who's like a representative of something, and Upalavana is just representing an unbelievably beautiful woman, because that was part of her reputation. And so in order to teach the monks about the great dangers of lust, and that she was put into that story, but it's something that these days, well, it can still happen in countries that don't have good laws, or in countries that have a culture of violence towards women. Indeed, it could happen. And we do have in our structure and in our Vinaya rules that Bhikkhuni, for example, is not allowed to go by herself into a place that's generally agreed to be dangerous. And we are under a relationship with the bhikkhus, so that when a bhikkhuni is ordained, there's a dual ordination. Both the bhikkhu and bhikkhuni sanghas come together to ordain a bhikkhuni. We obtain teachings from the bhikkhus on the lunar days, and we when we settle down in the place where we stay for Davasa, we stay someplace that's not too far away from where the bhikkhus are staying. And those kinds of things that are showing the friendship of the bhikkhunis to the bhikkhus is something that is a source of legitimacy and protection for the Bhikkhuni Sangha. So even at some times in history where even the government would not allow a woman to be on her own as an independent person, running her own business or having her own enterprise, where a woman is obliged to be under the protection of a man. Well, the Bhikkhuni Sangha, in these ways that are formalities that we still observe today. The Bhikkhuni Sangha is still under the friendly protection of the Bhikkhu Sangha. My closing thought about all this is that it's really important to me to respect and appreciate the teachings of the Buddha that have been passed down in the Pali text tradition. Even when I read scholarly articles by scholars who think that this particular teaching was something that is very early, and this teaching they think was not really spoken by the Buddha, but was attributed to the Buddha within the 100 years or the 200 years after the Buddha's parinibbana. Some words are put into the Buddha's mouth that are not, actually what the Buddha said. When I read those things, not in connection with the Bhikkhuni ordination, but other aspects of the Buddhist, philosophy, I nevertheless have got so much appreciation and faith that these early monastic practitioners, that many of them were enlightened, and they were practicing with the greatest of sincerity and taking the mass of teachings that had been spoken by the Buddha and had been remembered, and making the effort to fully understand them and to remember them as accurately as possible, and to take the diversity of different teachings and make them into something that was coherent and meaningful, where all the parts are fitting together. And so I have got so much love and appreciation, especially for the first 500 years of the Sangha, and who created the first layer of all of the commentaries, and the first sort of beginnings of the evolution, how Buddhism began to evolve in responding to the evolving cultural circumstances that Buddhism encountered. And I think that evolution is still happening. So I don't approve of taking an attitude that says that bad people were perverting the teachings of the Blessed One, or even I wouldn't agree with saying that the Blessed One was hateful towards women. But I do think that Buddhism always existed within a context, the cultural milieu, the context in which it was being practiced. And in many ways, the teachings were shaped to address the circumstances of how culture was evolving, how society was evolving. And I think that is something that did happen. It's difficult to think of that any Buddhist would have a prejudice against women or against any group. And I don't really want to be a militant person. All I want to do is try to understand the Dhamma as well as we can from the teachings that have been handed down, using it to realize as much as I can And my feminist act is that I'm doing these things while I have a female human body. So I try to practice the Dhamma according to the teachings of the Buddha with this female body. These are my reflections for International Bhikkhuni Day. And there's a few minutes left in which I would be happy to hear any comment about that. There's one question. Isn't gender just a samsaric construction, whereas in absolute reality there's no difference? Yes. But the persons who are able to realize enlightenment are coming from a samsaric condition. So there are a lot of stories and fables and metaphors in the later Mahayana tradition about shifting and changing of genders, which are exactly coming to this point. So you could say that even the transformation of Upalavana shows how gender is not essential and is mutable. And nevertheless, after she became transformed into a wheel-turning monarch in order to greet the Buddha, after that she voluntarily transformed her back into her feminine form as a bhikkhuni, where she bowed down and paid respects. So in this story, she was able to be a great man, or she was able to be a humble bhikkhuni, and she chose to be a humble bhikkhuni. And so that's a manifestation. Just like as I'm coming as a Westerner, I can't help coming from Western culture, and I do a lot of translating to make the Dhamma meaningful in terms of as it's encountering the Western culture. And also I'm aware that there are some aspects of a feminine culture, and so I also bring that. It's part of what we have to bring. So now I'll hear from Damon and then from Richard.
Well, I think you made my point that I put in there. In fact, I even cited some sutta that sort of backs that up further. Maybe you could comment on that as well.
Yes. This is Bhikkhuni Soma. What does womanhood matter at all when the mind is concentrated well, when knowledge flows unsteadily, as one sees it correctly into Dhamma? One to whom it might occur, I'm a woman, or I'm a man, or I'm anything at all, is fit for Mara to address. But one who's beyond that should not be addressed by Mara. Thank you for bringing that verse. Richard.
Thank you. The story about the beautiful bhikkhuni who encounters Mara, and she's able to make it so that Mara can't see her. Well, it's described in the suttas that if you enter into first jhana, Mara is blinded. Mara can't see you. So I think they're talking on a more subtle level. Of course, your body is still sitting there and everything, right? But you've blinded Mara because developing yourself towards enlightenment. That's why they say the gods and others can't understand the mind of the individual. because their minds are so much into some kind of becoming and some central desire or whatever. So they just can't understand. They can't conceive of a mind that's like, not interested in those things and going in a complete, other direction. Another thing is, I, for one, believe or that as far as transcendental things or political things, men and women should be completely equal. So, like in my own study of Theravada Buddhism, I probably attended, nuns' lectures much more than I ever attended bhikkhus' lectures. And although in terms of just listening to already taped things, I'd listened to a lot of stuff by bhikkhus only because they were doing things like Bhikkhu Bodhi going through the Majjhima Nikaya or something like that. So I wanted to study that and see what he had to say about it. But as far as live, lectures, I've gone much more with Bhikkhunis. Now, I've always had a question, and this may sound kind of heretical or something, and someone needs to. It's only like food for thought. Those 8 rules that the Buddha gives, that the Bhikkhunis are supposed to. This principle should be honored, respected, esteemed, and venerated, and should not be transgressed as long as life lasts. And each one of them ends. Now, this is Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. Maybe there's some other slightly different translation. I didn't look at it, but each one of them ends like that. So if you look at number 8 in particular, it says, from today, bhikkhunis are prohibited from admonishing bhikkhus, but bhikkhus are not prohibited from admonishing bhikkhunis. This principle too shall be honored, etc., as long as you live, right? So I don't know exactly, but this wording seems to imply to me like if you break any of these principles, you're supposed to be defrocked, let out of the Sangha, right? Because you're saying as long as life shall live, I'll follow these things. But there are quite a number of suttas where the bhikkhunis are criticizing some bhikkhu because maybe he insulted Ananda or something like that, So, and yet they're not punished or admonished or anything specific, like in any heavy way or at all. In some cases, I don't even see that in the sutta. So I've always wondered if these eight rules are kind of like a later day invention, maybe for the male to dominate over the female. That's kind of what I think. And that it could have been initially that the Buddha was saying that the bhikkhunis, if they just take the eight precepts, that's enough. And that allowed them a little bit more leeway in their living. What? I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear what you said.
I can give a better answer to that.
Good.
The heavy rules is called Garu Dhamma. The monks also have Garu Dhamma. In the monks' Vinaya, Garu Dhamma is referring to their Sangha Dana rules, which is the most serious rule. When you do a parajika, you're not a monk anymore. So while you're still a monk, the next most serious level is called Garu Dhamma. And so we believe that originally the Buddha told the bhikkhunis to follow the same Garu Dhamma rules, which was the entire Vinaya at that time. The Vinaya evolved over many years, right?
Right.
So the whole Vinaya that the monks had was those 8 Garu Dhammas. And then over the evolution of patriarchy and subsequent rewriting and so forth, then some later generations filled in the content of 8 Garu Dhammas that we see in the sutta now. So that's our explanation, and it is. This is something that Ayatollah discovered, and well, maybe others knew it, but we've had some interesting conversations back in the day, in pointing out to this to the in our debates we had to point out that the bhikkhu also has covered dhammas, and why does it mean one thing for him and something else for her?
Mm. Another thing I wanted to mention was, although it's slightly off topic, but it's kind of still on topic. You know, 45 years ago, I was studying Zen, and just as I'm doing now with Theravada, I was reading the Zen type chant literature, extensively. And there's a couple of interesting stories in there. One is there was a monk, and he was with a famous Zen teacher, or Chan, actually, he was Chinese Chan teacher. And he just felt like he wasn't making it. So he gave up being a monk and he left, but he went and took like a position at a well, we can say Bhikkhuni, but I don't know if they use that term, with nuns, okay? And he became kind of like the handyman, and helped them and everything and stuff like that. And while he was there, the abbess was also an enlightened teacher. And there he achieved enlightenment. I don't remember the exact details, but under her, he achieved enlightenment. So later on, he became a famous teacher himself. And he used to always say, my father gave me one ladle and my mother gave me the other ladle, and then I had a full meal. That was kind of like a funny thing. And also there's another story called Diamond Chu. He was a northern Chinese Buddhist monk who was a great scholar of the Diamond Sutra, and he knew all the commentaries and everything. And he heard that in the South, they were teaching a type of Buddhism which was beyond words and letters. So he became kind of incensed by that and thought, okay, let me go to the South. And he brought all his commentaries and his Diamond Sutra and everything on his back, and he says, I'll go down there and I'll defeat those people, and show them that, this is wrong teaching. So as he gets down to the South, he stops at a little tea stall on the side of the road. And the woman that was running the tea stall saw he was a monk and everything. He had this big bundle, and asked him, what was that bundle? And he says, oh, it's the Diamond Sutra and many commentaries. And so when you ask for tea in China, it's called, translated in English, it would be mind refreshment. So he said he wanted mind refreshment. So she said to him, well, in the Diamond Sutra, it says, there's no past mind, there's no present mind, there's no future mind. Which mind is it that you want to refresh? And he was completely defeated. The first woman Buddhist who's running a tea stall. And so he went out and he burned all of his translations and his Diamond Sutra and everything. And he went to study under a Chan master in the South. And he did eventually himself become an enlightened Chan master, according to that tradition. Anyway, so I always thought those two stories were really good. Anyways, that's all I wanted to mention. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. We've come past a little bit past the time, so I think it will be good for us to give our closing respect to the Triple Gem. And then, oh, by the way, this Saturday, in just a few short days, between 7 o'clock and 9 o'clock, we're having another program for the International Bhikkhuni Day, in which it's going to be like a dialogue or a panel. You'll have a chance to hear from these wonderful 8 Bhikkhunis that I've been telling you about, that have been together with us during this Vasa, having some conversation about our individual experiences. So it's a chance to meet our 2023 Sangha, and I hope that all of you will visit our website and register to attend the International Bhikkhuni Day program this coming Saturday. Araham Samma Sambuddha Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi Svakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namami.